I was 17 when Father Matteo told me the demon was dead. It was winter in Rome, the kind that makes stones sweat and air cling to your throat. I remember standing in the crypt under the basilica, the scent of candle wax and damp limestone, pressing in from every side. 6 men in cassocks surrounded the black coffin, each gripping a silver-tipped spear. The air shimmered faintly around it, as though heat was trapped inside. I had been told not to speak. I had been told not to watch. But Father Matteo insisted I should see this because, someday, the responsibility will be yours. The coffin was lowered into a stone pit lined with ancient symbols, ones I had never seen in any Bible. Each curve and jagged line seemed to crawl under my skin, as if my mind recognized them from a place it had never been. A gold seal was pressed onto the lid, bearing the insignia of the Custodi Umbri, the church's hidden order tasked with guarding the things too dangerous for heaven or hell. The oldest of the priests began chanting in a language I could not place. The words slid through the air like smoke, curling in unnatural shapes. The other men joined him, their voices low and rhythmic, echoing against the stone in a way that made my teeth ache. Then the temperature dropped, not gradually. One moment, my breath was steady. The next it poured from my lips like mist in the dead of night. I shivered violently as an almost imperceptible sound filled the chamber, something scratching, scraping faintly from inside the coffin. I looked at Father Matteo. His eyes told me to stay still. The scratching grew louder, more deliberate. A priest's voice faltered. The others compensated, raising the volume of the chant. The air trembled with each word, and then silence for a single heartbeat. The crypt was utterly still. My pulse roared in my ears. That's when it came. A voice so faint I thought I had imagined it, whispering my name from inside that coffin. It was not a human voice. It was too low, too deep, too layered, like dozens of mouths speaking in unison. Luca. The sound froze my spine. I stumbled back, my foot striking the edge of a gravestone. Father Matteo's hand clamped down on my shoulder, steadying me. His grip was iron, but his voice was calm. You heard nothing, he said. The coffin was sealed in the pit with molten lead. The priests continued their chants until my ears rang. When it was done, they placed a slab of marble over it, engraved with the symbol of the Custodi Umbri, and left without looking back. Father Matteo lingered, his eyes fixed on the stone. It is dead, he told me at last, and it will remain so, if you never speak of this again. But as we ascended the stairs, I could still feel it in my ears, whispering my name in the dark. For years, I convinced myself it had been my imagination, a trick of the crypt's acoustics, the stress of the moment, anything except the truth. I returned to my studies at the seminary, lived in the quiet quarters of the old monastery, and only saw Father Matteo on rare occasions. When I did, he never spoke of that night. I learned quickly that certain topics were like locked doors best left unopened. It wasn't until 5 years later, in the dead of summer, that the first sign appeared. It was a sweltering afternoon in Rome. I had been cataloguing old manuscripts in the library's restricted archives when I noticed something strange. One of the books on the desk had moved. Only an inch or two, but enough for me to know I hadn't left it that way. The book itself was odd, bound in cracked, wine-red leather. It bore no title on the spine. The pages were thick and yellowed, filled with dense Latin script in a hand that seemed too precise, too sharp. But wedged between 2 pages was something even stranger, a slip of vellum with my name written on it in black ink. The handwriting was familiar. I froze. It was the same exact script I had seen carved into the golden seal on the demon's coffin. The room felt smaller. The air seemed to hum faintly, just under the threshold of hearing. I tucked the vellum back into the book and slid it across the desk, deciding I had imagined the whole thing. But when I looked back, the slip was gone. I shut the book, heart pounding. My hands were clammy, my mouth dry. I locked it in the archive drawer and forced myself to leave, telling no one. That night, I dreamt of the coffin again. Only this time, it was no longer sealed. The marble slab was shattered, the pit yawning open like a wound. The black coffin stood upright, its lid gone, and inside, something moved, a figure taller than any man, wrapped in shadows like liquid. Smoke. It didn't speak, but I felt it. A pressure against my skull, a sensation like a claw tracing the inside of my thoughts. When I woke, I was sitting upright in bed, drenched in sweat, with the sound of my name echoing faintly in my ears. Luca. The whisper was so close it might have been right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The next morning, I found a second note, this one pinned to my door. No handwriting this time. only a crude drawing of the Custodia Umbris symbol, and beneath it, a date. The date was 3 days away. The date burned in my mind like a brand. 3 days. I had no idea what it meant, but the pit in my stomach told me it wasn't a coincidence. I spent the next 2 days in a strange half-life going through my duties at the seminary, but unable to shake the sensation of being watched. Even in the refectory, surrounded by the quiet clink of cutlery and murmured prayers, I could feel something lingering just beyond the edge of my vision. On the 3rd morning, the day written on the note, I woke to find the sky outside the monastery an unnatural shade of grey. The air was heavy, almost metallic, as though a storm was about to break. That's when the knock came. 3 sharp raps on the wooden door to my cell. When I opened it, Father Matteo stood there, his face pale and drawn. He didn't wait for me to speak. He simply said, "They've chosen you." I didn't understand. I asked him what he meant, but he only stepped inside, shut the door, and locked it. Then he pulled a small, leather-bound journal from beneath his robes. "This was my predecessor's," he said. "The last man who heard it speak his name." I took the journal with trembling hands. The cover was scratched, the pages brittle. Most of it was written in hurried Latin, but here and there, words were scrawled in Italian, frantic, almost illegible. The same phrase repeated over and over. "It doesn't die. It waits." Matteo leaned in close. "The Custodia Umbri was never meant to be a victory. The coffin is a prison, and prisons sometimes fail." I asked him why my name was on that vellum, why I was being drawn into this. He hesitated, then finally said, "Because once it whispers your name, it owns a piece of you. That piece calls to it. You will be summoned just as he was." A cold shiver ran through me. Matteo glanced toward the door as though expecting someone to burst through at any moment. "Tonight you must not sleep. You must not answer if it speaks. And above all, do not go where it calls." He pressed a rosary into my hand, its beads cold as ice, and left without another word. That night, I sat in my cell with a single candle burning, the journal open before me. Around midnight, the flame flickered violently, though the air was still. Then, I heard it again. Luca. The candle went out. The darkness after the candle died was not ordinary. It was the kind that swallows the edges of the room, makes you question whether you still have a body at all. I gripped the rosary so tightly that the beads cut into my palm. The voice came again, closer now. "Luca." It was not merely a whisper. It carried a wetness, like words spoken through a mouth that hadn't been used in centuries. My first instinct was to answer, to demand what it wanted. Matteo's warning screamed in my mind. I kept my mouth shut. The sound shifted. It was no longer in my head. It was in the room. The air grew heavy and cold, my breath visible in thin, silvery strands. I tried to pray, but the syllables snagged in my throat. Then, from the far corner, I saw movement, something darker than the dark dot. It stepped forward, and for the first time I saw its outline. A tall, lean shape, draped in something that might once have been a robe, but now hung in tatters. Its head tilted unnaturally, like it was studying me. And then it spoke again. "Do you want to see where I've been?" The floor beneath me shuddered. The stone wasn't just cold, it was breathing. Each inhale made the chamber's shadows pulse. Each exhale brought the smell of scorched earth and something older, something metallic. A shape began to form on the floor between us, a doorway, its edges outlined in dull red light. Through it, I could see a landscape that didn't belong to this earth. A blackened plain under a sky of churning ash, where twisted figures moved in the distance. Every muscle in my body told me to run, but my legs refused. It felt as if invisible hooks were tugging me toward the doorway. My rosary grew colder, the silver cross almost burning against my skin. The figure extended a hand. I didn't see fingers, just long, jointed shadows that quivered in the air. My mind screamed not to take it, but another part of me, deep and buried, wanted to know what lay beyond. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced myself to speak. "No, the room exploded with sound, a deep, guttural roar that shook the walls. When I opened my eyes, the doorway was gone, and the figure had retreated into the corner dot. It smiled without lips. "You will, soon." Then it was gone. The candle relit itself, with a sputter, as if mocking me. I didn't realize anything was wrong until I reached my apartment. The city outside was exactly as I'd left it, muted rain on the cobblestones, the smell of old stone and diesel. It felt normal, but I didn't. When I took off my coat, I saw it in the bathroom mirror. At first I thought it was dirt, just a faint smudge at the base of my neck, but as I leaned closer, I saw the pattern. It wasn't random. It was a symbol. The mark looked burned into my skin, yet there was no pain. A circle fractured into jagged lines, with a smaller circle in the center. Inside that, something that almost resembled an eye. I splashed water on it, scrubbed hard enough to make my skin raw, but the mark didn't fade. My pulse quickened. I could still hear Matteo's voice from the archives, warning me about the touch. I tried to distract myself with work, but the mark seemed too warm, not from the outside, but from beneath the skin. By nightfall, it was faintly glowing, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I could see it. And then came the first hallucination. I was making tea when the world shifted, like a camera lens snapping into another focus. The kitchen was still there, but overlaid on top was somewhere else entirely, an endless hallway of rusted gates, each one containing a shape that shouldn't move, but did. They pressed themselves against the bars, their mouths opening in silent hunger. The vision vanished in a blink, but the tea kettle had boiled over and hissed across the stove. I sat down, heart racing, my hand clutching the mark. Later that night, I dreamed of the figure from the chamber, except this time, it stood much closer. I could see the texture of its skin like burnt parchment stretched to thin. It lifted one hand and touched the side of my neck exactly where the mark was. I woke up gasping. My apartment was silent, except for a low tapping on the window. 3 slow taps. Pause. 3 again. When I pulled back the curtain, there was nothing but rain sliding down the glass. But my mark pulsed. 1 beat for every tap. I knew then it wasn't a warning. It was a tether. By the 3rd day, the mark had become more than an irritation. It was a constant presence. Like someone breathing against the back of my neck, I avoided Matteo's calls. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe the stress of the archives had finally cracked something in my mind. But then the whispers began. They didn't sound like words at first, just a low vibration in the air, faint enough to pass for tinnitus. But as the hours went by, the vibrations began to shape themselves into syllables, and those syllables formed my name, over and over, in a dozen different tones, some deep and ancient, others like a child murmuring through cracked teeth. When the sound became unbearable, I left my apartment and walked without direction. The streets were slick from rain, the lamps casting halos of light that swam in the mist, and yet every turn I took seemed to bring me closer to the oldest part of the city. I didn't want to go there. That was where the Vatican walls rose like a fortress against the skyline. But my steps felt guided, not forced, exactly, but compelled. The mark dropped harder with every block, as if it was sensing its birthplace. When I reached the northern wall, the air felt wrong. It was warmer here, despite the rain, and the street lamps flickered in a strange rhythm. The whispers sharpened, growing urgent, guiding me toward a section of stone that looked no different from the rest. Then, without warning, a portion of the wall shifted. Not swung open, shifted, as if the stones themselves slid aside to reveal a narrow passage. The corridor beyond smelled of old parchment and iron. It was lined with faded frescoes, but not of saints or holy battles. These showed gates, iron gates guarded not by angels, but by robed figures whose faces were deliberately erased. Their hands were always raised towards something in the dark. I walked deeper, unable to stop myself. The whispers swirled inside my skull, forming half phrases I almost recognized. I brushed my fingers against the walls, and the stone felt warm, alive. Even then I realized the frescoes were changing. The faceless figures now leaned closer to whatever was behind those gates, their erased features replaced with something else, features that were sharp, inhuman. By the time I reached the final archway, the air had grown thick. My vision swam, and a single thought cut through the fog. You're not walking toward it. It's coming to meet you. The archway yawned like the mouth of something alive. I hesitated, but the air itself seemed to inhale, drawing me forward. My foot crossed the threshold, and the temperature dropped so sharply my breath fogged. The chamber was too vast to fit within the Vatican walls. The ceiling arched high above, lost in shadows that seemed to twist and move. The walls pulsed, faintly, not like stone but like muscle. Every few seconds, the entire space expanded and contracted, as if the room itself were breathing. In the center stood an iron slab, chained to the floor with links as thick as my wrist. The slab was slick, reflecting the faint light from oil lamps that burned with an unnatural green flame. The smell here was a blend of myrrh, rust, and something far older, something that made my stomach clench. I moved closer, my footsteps echoing in a way that felt wrong, like each sound was swallowed before it reached the far walls. and then I saw them runes carved deep into the iron, filled with a black resin that shimmered faintly. The shapes were unfamiliar, but they stirred recognition, like a word I'd read in a dream and forgotten. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing from the slab, the chains, even the flickering flames. They no longer called my name, they were speaking through it. I couldn't understand the language, but the tone was hungry. Something shifted in the shadows at the edge of the chamber. My eyes locked onto it, a form hunched low, just beyond the reach of the green light. It didn't move like a person. Each motion was jerky, yet deliberate, like a marionette pulled by too many strings. I took a step back, my heel scraping the stone. The sound made the shape pause, and then it sniffed the air. That's when I noticed the mark on my arm was glowing faintly. The skin around it pulled tight, like it was straining against something beneath. The figure moved closer, and as it passed into the light, my breath caught. It wasn't flesh. It was made of shadow, thick and writhing, but bound together in the shape of a body. Where its face should have been, there was only an impression of void that seemed to pull the green light into it. T stopped at the slab, its head tilting toward me, and then the slab itself trembled. The runes flared with light, and the black resin began to drip like molten tar. The whispers merged into one voice, deep and resonant, filling the chamber and my skull all at once. You carry the key. The shadow figure turned fully toward me. The chains rattled, and the air seemed to rush out of the room like the chamber itself had exhaled in anticipation. The chamber's air pressed inward, thick as water, making it hard to breathe. My pulse roared in my ears. The chains around the slab jerked once, then again, as if something beneath was testing their strength. The shadow figure's form rippled, its edges fraying like smoke in a wind I couldn't feel. It reached out, and the runes on the slab flared, burning bright enough to cast harsh green light across the breathing walls. I saw that each link of the chain was etched with the same markings, now carved into my arm. The voice came again, no longer a whisper, but a command that filled my bones. Release it. My throat went dry. Release what? I asked before realizing I wasn't supposed to speak. The moment my voice echoed in the chamber, the walls convulsed, sending a low groan through the space. The slab shifted. Something beneath. It moved slow at first, then with a sudden, violent heave that sent cracks racing outward across the floor. A stench like scorched iron and rot poured into the air. I took a step back, but my heel caught on the uneven floor. My hand shot out instinctively to steady myself, landing on the chain. The moment my skin touched the metal, pain ripped through my arm, white-hot and blinding. I saw flashes, images burned into my mind in a heartbeat, a battlefield lit by a black sun. An army of eyeless figures kneeling before something too vast to see in full. A great cage, hanging in a void, swaying as if something inside was moving. When the visions ended, I was on my knees, gasping. The mark on my arm was no longer faint, it was alive, writhing like ink dropped in water. The shadow figure leaned closer, its faceless void now inches from mine. I expected cold, but instead, heat radiated from it, oppressive and suffocating. The slab's chains snapped one after the other with sharp metallic cries. A hiss, like steam escaping from a fissure deep underground, filled the room. The stone beneath my feet trembled, dust drifting from the invisible ceiling. And then the slab tipped. Something crawled out from beneath it, thin at first, like claws, but impossibly long, jointed in the wrong places. Each movement sent a vibration through the floor, as though the entire chamber was reacting to its emergence. The shadow stepped back and lowered its head, almost reverently, from the darkness beneath the slab. I heard the sound that would follow me for the rest of my life, a voice, deep and ancient, speaking my name not as a question, but as a claim. The walls exhaled again, but this time, the breath carried with it the faint scent of burning feathers. The thing that emerged from beneath the slab was not a shape my mind wanted to understand. My eyes tried to follow its outline, but every blink seemed to redraw it, shifting between a winged silhouette, a crawling beast, and a pillar of black fire. Its claws gripped the edges of the slab and dragged the rest of its body free. Each movement sounded like stone being ground to dust. The golden chains that had once bound it lay in shattered coils, their runes now cold and dead. The voice came again, deeper now, reverberating from inside my chest rather than from the air. You are mine. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't respond. Every muscle in my body locked, not from fear, but from something heavier, something that felt like gravity itself, bending toward the creature. It moved closer, and I saw the mark on my arm pulse in perfect rhythm with the glow in its eyes, two molten coals that swirled with patterns I almost recognized, like constellations drawn from a dead sky. "You carry my seal," it said, and I realized it wasn't speaking aloud at all. The words slid into my mind like oil into water, spreading until there was no space left for my own thoughts. My lips moved on their own. Why me? It leaned in until its face, if it could be called that, was only shadows and teeth. "Because your blood remembers me. Because you are the only key the cage will answer to." I felt my pulse race, but it wasn't fear this time, it was recognition. Flashes of memory, not my own, rushed in, a battlefield littered with burning wings, my hands clutching a sword made of living flame, the roar of 1,000 voices chanting my name. The voice pressed harder into my mind. "They lied when they told you I was dead. They lied about everything. You and I are bound, and there is no death in binding." The room seemed to tilt. I felt weightless, as though we were no longer underground, but suspended in a void with no walls, no floor, no air. The only things that existed were me, the creature, and the sound of my heart hammering. It reached out and touched my chest with one talon. Pain ripped through me, but this time it was mixed with something else, power. My veins burned, and the mark on my arm blazed so bright I could see its light through my skin. "You freed me," it said. "Now I will free you from them." Before I could ask who them was, the shadow figure that had guided me here stepped forward, its own form trembling as if resisting the pull of the demon's presence, and then I saw it etched into the shadow's chest was the same mark that now lived on my arm. The chamber was no longer still. The air vibrated with a low hum, as if the stones themselves were trembling in anticipation. The demon stood before me, fast and shifting, its form half light, half nightmare. The shadow guide kept its distance, though its mark glowed in sync with mine, a silent warning that we were connected in ways I didn't understand. The demon's eyes narrowed, the molten constellations within them swirling faster. "You feel it, don't you? The strength, the clarity. The world above will never touch you again if you stay with me." I did feel it. My muscles no longer ached. The fear that had driven me here was replaced by a strange confidence, as though the creature's presence felt in every fracture of my soul. For a moment, it was tempting. The shadow stepped closer, its voice thin and strained. "If you take his hand, you will never be yours again." The demon laughed, the sound like stone doors slamming shut. "Mine or theirs do. You think you have ever truly been free? Look at you, marked since birth, led here by their lies. You are a pawn in their game, and I am offering you the board." My mind split in two. One part screamed to resist, to remember every warning and every prayer. The other urged me forward, drawn by the raw power humming through my veins. "Choose," the demon said. "The seal cannot be shared. One path will burn your soul, the other will burn theirs." The shadow reached into its robe and pulled out a strip of aged parchment. My name was written on it in the same jagged script I had seen in the vaults. Below my name was a single word, claimed. The demon's talon extended toward me again, hovering inches from my chest. "Say yes, and I will tear their claim from your flesh. Say yes, and you will see the truth they have buried for centuries." The chamber's walls began to crack, light spilling in not white light, but deep crimson, as if the stone bled. The hum grew louder, and the floor beneath us buckled. The shadow's voice cut through the chaos. "If you take his power, you will never leave this place human," and that was the heart of it. This wasn't just about life or death, it was about what I would become. I closed my eyes. The mark on my arm pulsed faster, matching the beat of my heart. I could feel the demon leaning closer, feel the shadow's desperation. Two futures stretched before me, both soaked in blood. When I opened my eyes, I knew exactly what I was going to say, but the story doesn't end with my choice, because that was when the second voice spoke. It came from the cracked ceiling above, calm and ancient. "You are not his to claim.